everybody. My name is Francesco Spagnolo. I'm curator of the Magnes. We host every week what we call pop-up exhibitions. We invite speakers from campus or the community, and we pair them with objects from the Magnes collection, one of the largest Jewish museum collections in the world. The pairing can be specific or symbolic. Today is both. And it's a delight to have Rita Lucarelli. I think I'm one of the few people on campus who can say your name the way it's supposed to be said. Rita Lucarelli is Assistant Professor of Egyptology here at UC Berkeley, who's been working, as you can see behind me, has been doing amazing research on ancient Egyptian magic and Mediterranean, and part of international research groups, and one of the most globe-trotting scholars in our midst. She's always at a different conference in a different part of the world any day. There's some magic in that too, I'm sure. The topic today is ancient Egyptian and Jewish magic. We didn't have any ancient Jewish magical objects, but the templates are very ancient, even in contemporary objects. The two ones on display that accompany today's talk are one, a birth amulet, and location still determined in the Mediterranean. Could be Egypt, could be Greece. It lists names of protective angels, and also of patriarchs and matriarchs in the biblical tradition to protect a newborn child. And next to it is an object that would be more surprising in being considered as an amulet. It's a Torah pointer. It's used to point to the text of the Hebrew Bible when it's read publicly in the synagogue, so that the scroll of the Bible will not be touched by a human hand. So actually, if you notice, it's actually shaped as a hand, so it's also a little of a subversive object, because it does, with that little reproduced hand, exactly what it's not supposed to be done, right? It touches with the finger the text of the Bible. And it's inscribed. It's inscribed by a donor, a young man. It comes from Cairo. And it's concluded by an acronym, by a series of Hebrew letters that are a set of blessings or protective blessings upon the donor. So it's a ritual object. It's not an amulet, but it has amuletic value. And in the research we do here, and we've been involving students, and there have been presentations in the course of the last couple of years on topics ranging from amulets to other magical or in any case protective text. The research that we do here is to see at the breadth and the many connections that the topic of magic has in folklore and especially material culture. How many everyday objects are actually having functions that we do not expect to be so archaic in their origin. So with this little introduction about the accompanying artwork, please join me in welcoming Rita Lucarelli to the podium.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Francesco. Grazie. I'm so glad to have an Italian colleague at the Magnes Museum who indeed can pronounce my name very well, but he's not the only one. And I work on ancient Egyptian magic and demonology on a comparative perspective since a few years, and I never attempt a comparison with ancient Jewish magic until last year, so this is all very recent. And since I'm an Egyptologist, I'm not an expert in Jewish studies, of course, in order to compare two different realities, I had to really ask help to colleagues of Jewish studies, and I was very happy and very fortunate to start a research project with Gideon Bohak from Tel Aviv University, professor of Jewish philosophy and one of the experts of ancient Jewish magic. And within this project, for this project, we met in Bonn, in Germany, last July, and we held a very interesting interdisciplinary symposium on indeed ancient Egyptian and Jewish magic. I learned a lot there, and actually many of the results of this conference is are what inspired my paper today, and what you will hear, especially at the beginning of this talk, will be a few remarks I've been putting together with Gideon Bohak when starting our project. And indeed, I would like to, since I'm at the Magnes, I think is a good occasion to talk a bit, before going into the topic of magic, talking a bit about possible cooperation and interrelationship between Egyptology and Jewish studies. Two disciplines which were born more or less in the same time. 1822 is when Jean-François Champollion finally deciphered the hieroglyphic writing system, thus enabling scholars to read Egyptian literature for the first time after a millennium and a half. The academic discipline of Jewish studies was born in Berlin 3 years earlier, from what I've heard from my colleagues again, when a group of dedicated Jewish intellectuals tried for the first time to create a framework for the academic study of Judaism. Both disciplines had a long and glorious prehistory, whether we think of or Apollo, in the case of Egyptology, one of the first scholars, if we want to call him scholars, of Egyptian hieroglyphs. Here you can see some of his hieroglyphs in the famous hieroglyphic of Apollo. It was not always really giving the right interpretation of them, but it was one of the first attempts. Or individuals like Flavius Josephus from Jewish studies. In both cases, the early 1820s marked the new departures and the emergence of scholarly agendas and scholarly tools that still serve both disciplines today. While born at almost the same time, Egyptology and Jewish studies were born in very different social contexts and developed in very different ways. Egyptology probably became quicker and accepted and respected, although a bit marginal, maybe academic discipline, often characterized by a focus on language and text, and with some brilliant scholars, and mostly referring to studying religious sources. Jewish studies struggled for some years before it gained the respect of the academic community at large, and has often found it difficult to decide what exactly it wishes to offer to Jewish scholars and students, and what it might offer to those who are not themselves Jewish. Moreover, while the history of Egyptology is one of gradual evolution from the days of Champollion to our own days, the history of Jewish studies was constantly reshaped by the history of the Jews in the 19th and 20th centuries in Europe, in the US, and in Israel. And very rarely Egyptologies and Jewish studies intersect. Maybe an exception is the study of some specific parts of the corpus of ancient texts that most Egyptologists know as the Old Testament, and most Jewish studies scholars will refer to as the Hebrew Bible. And so in stories like the patriarchs' long stays in Egypt, the Exodus, or the impact of Egypt on the Israelites on the First Temple period, there is much for Egyptologists and scholars of Jewish studies to study together. And also another exception is certainly the study of the Jewish presence in Greco-Roman Egypt, which can involve also scholars of different disciplines. Otherwise, there are not much has been done on a comparative level. And this is a pity, because in spite of great difference between the Egyptian and the Judaic geographical situations, such as structure, historical development, and cultural productions, there are some inherent similarities between both worlds, and these deserve more attention. Moreover, also when there are differences, and there are many, the very act of comparing the Egyptian and the Jewish world could be of great benefit to scholars of both fields. We should indeed think that of all the people of the Hellenistic and the Roman worlds, and excluding the Greeks and the Romans themselves, the Egyptians and the Jews are those for which we have the greatest abundance of source materials, with Persians and Phoenicians coming for a third place. So there is much room for comparison, also just for the fact that both are very well documented. And one sphere in which the documentation is especially abundant is that of magic. In the Egyptian world, in the Egyptian world, the magical practices are attested from the pyramid text of the 3rd millennium BC towards the Coptic magic period, so 6th, 7th century CE. In the Jewish world, the sources became abundant later, only from the 3rd or 4th century CE, but remain abundant for a long time in the next centuries. In both cases, we may study magical texts, magical objects, and the wider context of these texts and objects within the society that produced them. And such studies have often been conducted, but a comparison indeed of the results obtained in both disciplines has never been attempted before. That's why we started this project. Let's start therefore to see what we mean by magic according to an Egyptian perspective. When thinking to ancient Egyptian magic, probably one of the first images you get in your mind will be related to a world of mystery and illusion, similar to the biblical history of the Egyptian magicians faced by Aaron and Moses. And so in Exodus chapter 7, we read about Aaron's staff becoming a snake and the plague of blood. And it is interesting that Pharaoh's wise men and magicians do the same thing as these miracles with, as you say in the text, with their secret arts. This was magic, secret arts. However, of course, these secret arts were not powerful enough as what God did, and so in the end, God's snake is the winner. This wooden figure is 20 centimeters high, is among Manchester's museum's most discussed Egyptian objects. In Manchester there is a very good Egyptian collection in England. It represents a naked female with the face of a lion and two movable arms attached with pegs, and in each hand she holds serpents made of metal. The figurine is just one piece from an intriguing group found amidst debris at the bottom of a late Middle Kingdom shaft burial, so we are around 1700, 1600 BC, and this is called as the Magician Tomb of the Ramesseum. Is a very important group because we have different objects all related to practice of magic, so maybe the owner was indeed a magician, bringing in his tomb his ritual tools. That's one of the interpretations. What we don't know is if this was a ritual expert or an illiterate sorcerer. We don't know exactly how the performance was going on. And also, in case of this figure, there are different interpretations. We don't know if it's a hybrid divine figure or a priestess with a mask. Again, we have many open questions. This is just an example to show how many open questions we have when we study ancient Egyptian magic. And this is why I think comparative views with other magic traditions are very useful. In order to try to define magic in ancient Egypt, one should necessarily first outline the terminological issues related to the use of this term within the ancient Egyptian system of beliefs and its relationship with religion. And at the basis, of course, there is always a problem of translation in the ancient concept of an ancient concept into a modern English word. And so the term magic comes from Greek mageia, which is attested actually from the 5th century BC, is a negative term and almost opposite, we could say, to the concept generally translated with magic in ancient Egyptian, which is Heka. And Heka is also the name of a god, is the personification of magic, and is a creative power. Heka appears in many magical funerary decorations, iconographies, in the boat of the sun god while traveling in the netherworld. It's this guy here, the anthropomorphic god. participating actively in creation, or in this papyrus of the end of the first millennium BC, Heka, you can recognize it here with holding snake staff. So snake staff as magician tools are one of the most powerful tools for magic, not only in ancient Egypt. And here is, together with Mat, the symbol of justice, and Osiris, the king of the dead, is participating to the final judgment of the deceased, or to the, ritual in the netherworld. And we have many texts speaking in ancient Egypt of the very positive role of Heka, of magic. We have a text called Instructions for King Merikara, belonging to what we call the wisdom literature in ancient Egypt. So, instructions for the king to be, where it is said it was in order to be weapons to ward off the blow of heavens that he made magic for them. So, considering that anyway, Heka is positive, it's a bit difficult sometimes to decide which objects are magic. Magical text, for instance, can be mixed together with medical prescriptions. Magical performance are embedded in the daily temple activities. At the basis, there is always the conception of Sa in ancient Egyptian, protection from personal enemies, from enemies of the state, from demons, netherworldly demons. And in order to be in protect, or to protect a place or a person, you need to deal with Heka in different ways. And so we have other terms used in spells. Heka is mostly directed to the god, but we have terms like Bao, meaning kind of transcendent emanations, which we find in spells, or we have terms like Aku, which means efficacy, and efficacy is another key term in magical traditions in general, especially in the Egyptian one. And Aku is a performative power used by the magician. Or we have Ra, a term indicated by the hieroglyph of the mouth, and is related to written magic and spoken magic, so a very peculiar one. While in many medical texts, where magic is also an ingredient of the whole prescription, we have the term peheret, which maybe we could translate indeed as a remedy, although it's a magical remedy. And the most frequently used forms of magic, according to my classification, also in agreement with colleagues, are a few ones. So this is just very funny. I really love this cream, which you can buy on Amazon, Egyptian magic, but was not the one used by the Egyptians. The most used one in ancient Egypt was certainly defensive magic, or apotropaic, so-called magic. The most attested one, for sure, in the funerary sphere and in daily life. And so the aim was warding off demonized deceased, dangerous spirits, demons of the netherworld. It's very much used, and we have a lot of evidence on this kind of magic. Magic aiming at healing. So if defensive magic was, for instance, to chase away the snake before it will bite you, once you've been bitten, then you need another kind of magic, and that's curative magic. So healing from insect bites, disease affecting a patient. And we have many amulets and magical objects used, especially statues used for curative magic, such as Horus on the crocodiles, very famous typology of statues in Egypt, or stela statues. Transformative magic, including also what is called love magic. I don't like this term because actually this is a very aggressive magic, so calling love magic to me makes no sense. But that's the current definition. It deals with the manipulation, change of shapes or status provoked by magic, and it was especially used in Greco-Roman Egypt. So in the period of syncretism, when there were also other influences, and we will see how aggressive magic is also very common in the Jewish world. Can be called also binding magic. So you can indeed, for so-called love magic, you aim at bounding the desired person to the spell perpetuator. Divination is closely connected to magic. I personally don't define it magic, but many scholars speak of divinatory magic, also for Egypt. I consider it as something different, but well, we don't have time to go into that. What is important instead is to keep in mind that in Egypt there's no black magic. So actually all current trends of sects and indeed black magic practitioners using Egyptian symbols, well, they're wrong. Probably they don't know, but in ancient Egypt indeed magic was completely legal. The magician was also a priest, a healer, a physician. His action was requested both inside and outside the temple, and so there was not even need for an emic term for magic. They didn't need to define magic, because, and this is also what I always say to my students, magic is religion in ancient Egypt. There's not a real difference. So scholars of the 20s or even later were still considering magic versus religion, not for Egypt at least. Well, also I think not in general, but it's more personal. So these things were, in this case, I think very simple. We see the magic is positive, it's part of the temple practices. The king even can be a magician. Magic is a god. Everything is really simple and clear. When I had to deal with, for me, completely new Jewish world realities concerning magic, I realized that indeed things were a bit more complicated. And in the Jewish world, there was, speaking indeed with my colleagues, seems that there is a root used for magic, and I really apologize for my pronunciation of these words, but I hope I'm saying the right one. Kaf Shin Pei is the root for words related to magic, but always with a very negative sense. So always related to condemnation, prohibition. From what we read in Exodus, for instance, where the magician is condemned to death. In other texts, is always death by stoning, so very violent death for the magician, the poor magician. And but at the same time, both the Bible and the Halakha, so the body of Jewish religious laws derived from the Torah, do not include a clear-cut regulation of which magical acts are forbidden. So it looks like they are not condemning the practice, but just the practitioner, which is, I think, for me, very interesting. We don't have this in ancient Egypt. So we have, instead, in this evidence, the Jewish evidence, we have prominent biblical and rabbinical figures. So biblical like Joseph, Aaron, Moses, rabbinical figures, Hanina ben Dosa and others, portrayed in the act of performing magic. The magic seems to be permitted, according to rabbinic law, for the purpose of studying magic, study what is it. So this is for us then very difficult to understand this relation, opposition to Jewish religion and culture, especially for outsiders, for non-specialists of Jewish studies. It's an ambivalent attitude from what I understand of what I've been reading on studies of Jewish magic. And it's still, being ambivalent is still, it still constitutes a kind of authoritative precedent for the practice of magic in the Jewish world. And this is why actually we have a lot of archaeological and textual sources produced by Jewish magicians or employed by Jewish clients that can be seen referring to magic. And we have, for instance, figures like the Mekashefa, to be translated as a female magician or witch or sorcerers, which must be put to death in Exodus. And we have also a passage, another passage where the Israelites are given a long list of diviners a magician who must not be found among them, including the male magician, the Mekashef, or the Balov, which is the necromancer, and the Doresh Ela Metim, which is literally, I think, he who consults the dead. And we have many other references, so a list of those practitioners. We should not be worshipped or anyway taken in good consideration. In this legal situation, condemnation on magic does not change even later. In the Second Temple period, still we have prohibition on practicing magic by the Temple Scroll from Quran. In rabbinic literature, again we are saying that the Mekashef has to be put to death by stoning. And so, on the basis of this evidence, we would expect the ancient Israelites and Jews not to practice any form of magic. But this is far from being the case, since we have also reading the Hebrew Bible many examples of good Jews who practice what, from our ethic perspective, would definitely count as magic. The stories of Moses and Aaron beating the Egyptian magician in their own game, the elaborate priestly ritual for detecting whether a woman had committed adultery, and some other examples, some other stories. Of course, this is not the place now to discuss the discrepancy between the Jewish prohibition of magic and the practice, but what is more interesting to point out for me as an Egyptologist, a scholar also of ancient Egyptian magic, is how my colleagues in Jewish studies really need to choose what sources to use for their study. Since if they would only refer to sources which are defined as magic sources by the Jews, then there would be not much. But if they have an ethic perspective, they can recognize also in the Jewish world, in the ancient Jewish world, many forms and sources of magic. And I was glad to see that, and I was happy, I found a similarity. The most attested forms of magic in the Jewish world were indeed also defensive magic and curative magic. Aggressive magic, divinatory magic follow. And well, I wanted to quote here Gideon Bohak that during the conference in Bonn, when discussing indeed how those Jews were actually probably thinking and talking about magic, since we have all this complex evidence where it seems that the same Jews both practiced aggressive magic, for instance, and at the same time they were accusing those who do the same. So actually, Gideon Bohak used as example a quote from Macbeth, where actually he was asking, now, you secret black and midnight hags, what is it you do? And so they would have answered, those Jews, they would have answered like the Were sisters did without a name. And this, I really like this comparison, actually. So for today, since I don't have much time at my disposal, and I know everybody has to go, it's a very busy time of the day, noon lectures, I'm going to speak very quickly of two examples of magic in the Jewish and in the ancient Egyptian world, which I think can be offer a good basis for comparison, and this will be something having to do, a source having to do with aggressive oneric magic for the Jewish evidence and spells against nightmares for the Egyptian one. The ancient Egyptians were very concerned with demonic assaults during the sleep, and although they never represented the nightmare demons, incubi and succubi, However, those demons are very much mentioned, and so since I don't have Egyptian representation of nightmare demons, I always use two of my favorite ones, this painting of John Henry Fuseli with the ugly nightmare oppressing the breast of the beautiful female sleeper, so the male ugly demon and beautiful female sleeper is a bit cliche, but it gives the idea of the nightmare oppressing during the sleep disorders. It's a representation of sleep disorders. And even the sleeping man oppressed by the jinn Kabus from Turkey, 1582, is very representative. We don't have this in ancient Egypt about nightmare demons, but we have many texts. One of the earliest is one of the so-called execration texts from Mirgissa in the south and dated late Middle Kingdom, 1991, 1803 BC, more or less, where we have a list of enemies, personal enemies, enemies of the state, dangerous forces, and so here this list are written on objects which are then broken in order to destroy those enemies. And between many others in this apotropaic list, as I like to call it, we have all the bad speech, all bad projects, all bad conjurations, all bad plans, all bad things, all bad dreams, in all bad sleep. So this is one of the attestation of those nightmare demons. And then we have many objects like this very comfortable headrest, which the Egyptians used to sleep instead of pillows. And they're still in use, actually, in some certain African tribes, from as far as I know. So these were decorated with those defensive demons, crocodile face, again holding snake staffs, spitting snakes as well from the mouth. This other looks similar but with some details. So these were protective kind of gods or demons against the nightmares. Or we have these other very interesting objects decorated again with figures of protector, gods and demons, and they're called apotropaia or ivory amuletic ones. They've been found in tombs, but probably they were used in daily life and put around the bed to protect during sleep. And the few hieroglyphs here, they just speak about protection during the day, protection during the night, a sentence, a phrase that you can find in many magical spells against nightmare demons, and even this in the day, in the night, is of course also in Jewish sources. And we have many, many spells against nightmare demons, like this one is one of the most famous, been translated, published a lot of times, because it has a very nice explicative title, a book of dispelling terrors which come to fall upon a man during the night. And the structure, we don't have time to read it, but it's very typical of magical spell for daily use, with the demon which is repelled, he has to look back. So there is the old evil eye intention here. Is a personified nightmare. So it has to be destroyed as a personal enemy. And some scholars of Egyptian magic also think that probably they believe that those nightmares came from enemies. This is a conception we found in the Jewish world, where there is also this belief that you can send a bad dream to harm somebody. We find this in the Egyptian evidence as well, although maybe not so explicit. We see here a series of gods invoked in order to push away the nightmare. And there are very interesting instructions where it is said that this spell has to be recited upon a piece of linen to be placed on the throat of a man until he is seen to be quiet. And this belief in the power of words, of written magic on the object is actually something which we can see also on written amulets from the Jewish world. You need an object, but not only the object has to be inscribed. And even if you cannot read it, even if you're illiterate, the power of those words if the object is close to you, will be still very important and very effective. So in spells like this one, the nightmare is personified. We have, of course, many demons in ancient Egypt. Some scholars actually call them minor gods. I still like to call them demons. And while comparing with the Jewish world, the evidence from the Jewish world, I could see also many evidence of demons. The Babylonian Talmud and other rabbinic texts instruct us on what the rabbis of late antique Palestine and Babylonia had to say about demons, and they seem to be considered a source of the religious elite, probably, and so I think this can be compared to magical composition made by theologians in ancient Egypt for the pharaoh only. But what I'm interested to is especially another kind of sources for the Jewish world, which are those bowls and amuletic objects, because indeed those sources seem to have been really used. Although there is not a demonology in this, we don't have explanations of what are the demons. You can see that there were the beliefs were there, and these were like real magical practice indicators, the same as we have in the Jewish amuletic papyri, amuletic objects I show you before. And those bowls, probably, well, some of you here are familiar with those. For some of you who are not, they were produced in Sasanian Babylonia between the 5th and 8th century CE. And we have many demons mentioned there, especially Lilith, which is descendant of the Mesopotamian Lilitu, which is succubus, female form of Lilu. Incubus, we have other list of demons, some of them to be identified indeed as nightmare to be dragged away. And there is one published ball in an article of Dan Levin, where it seems that these nightmare demons can take the form of a pig, of a ram, of a dog. And it was interesting for me to see that those are animals used also for manifestation of demons in ancient Egypt, not particularly for the nightmare demon, but for many others. So there is a common imagery, we could say. At the moment, time is really going fast. There is, in the Jewish world, that's what I was interested, especially of late antiquity, so Jewish world of late antiquity, as attested in some of the books. We find the practices against nightmares, and this has to do with a peculiar type of magic presently being studied by Alessia Bellusci, a colleague and friend from Tel Aviv University, whom I wish to thank to let me use this still unpublished photo, which will be in one of her forthcoming essays on this topic. I was very interested because indeed, also according to the text of this ball, this is maybe a demon in the bed, or a person, we don't know, it's very difficult to, the text does not refer to the figure. Somebody else actually said this is a fat demon, but I prefer to think that this is maybe a kind of sheet covering the corpse, and this here is the pillow, something like that. And this will make sense with the contents of this bowl, and also with text occurring on other similar bowls. And here I have two examples, again thanks to Alessia to provide me with this text. One bowl from the British Museum collection, where it is said the evil Lilith that causes the heart of the sons of men to go astray and appears in the dream of night and appears in the visions of day that burns cast down with nightmare. And then another one saying bound and sealed are the demon, the dead, the Satan, the curse, and the evil Liliths which appear during the night and during the day. So there is always, the nightmare actually does not appear always only in the night. It can be also a daily vision. And we find this also in Egypt. We have evidence in Greco-Roman Egypt of the so-called demon meridianus, the demon occurring at noon, probably because, well, it was very hot there, so you really see demons at a certain point, also during day. Well, I hope that this brief presentation of 2 case studies of ancient magic, of course we could say much more on those objects, but this will go much more into details, and also, well, I have to admit that there are some linguistic gaps when doing this comparison. As an Egyptologist, I cannot do it with, unless I knew the language, but I don't, so I cannot do it without the help of my colleagues in Jewish studies and vice versa, but still, there is a lot to compare, and I hope that I convinced you how useful and interesting a broader comparison between ancient Egyptian and Jewish magic would be, not just on a phenomenological level of beliefs, but also on the basis of types of sources, written or non-written, their function within the society which produced them. And I'm glad to realize as Egyptologists indeed that it seems that the abundant publications of Jewish magical texts in the past decades have clearly shown that rather than a deviation appropriated by non-Jewish tradition, magic is intrinsic in Jewish culture as a phenomenon either overlapping or coexisting with Jewish religion and ritual. And Peter Schaeffer, a very famous scholar in Jewish studies, about 20 years ago said that we are far away from a theory of magic in the religion of Judaism. And it's true, making a theory of magic, not only in the Jewish study, for Jewish studies, but also for Egyptologists, is very difficult. We are still struggling for finding definitions of magic, of demons, and other issues. But well, today it seems that almost all scholars in Jewish studies acknowledge the existence of a specific Jewish magic traditions. We have here a very beautiful example of objects we can work with, modern and ancient, and the modern one are as important as the old one. And this magic was produced, performed within Jewish culture for centuries, maybe even for millennia. And this was the same as occurred as happened in ancient Egypt. From the 3rd millennium BC towards the Antiquity, we have evidence for magic, and I think this opens indeed exciting perspective towards an interdisciplinary and comparative study of magic and demonology in Antiquity. Thank you. Go into each stories, but I mentioned the stories of Moses. Yes, of course, yes. Yes.
Thank you, Rita. I suggest you go to the anthropological literature on magic because it's very extensive and rich. And anthropologists divide magic basically into 2 different categories: sympathetic and contagious. So maybe you can come to some other mode of comparison if you use these categories, but I'm not going to go into that. My question is, what is the implication, the wider implication of the similarities between Egyptian and Jewish magic in the ancient world? Is the implication that one group got it from the other, or is it that there's a wider Mediterranean use of magic at the time? There should be some wider message in your comparison.
Yes, indeed. We discussed this question a lot also with this group of scholars with whom we've been doing this, and there were multiple questions. And indeed, it seems that some of the comparison which came out are actually just because in the old Mediterranean traditions they kind of use the same type of tools or practices or ritual performances for magic. But in particular particular between the Jewish and ancient Egyptian world, for sure the Greco-Roman period was a period of contact. And in late antiquity, then we have communities of Jews living in Egypt. So it seems that some influence were there. It's very difficult just to understand who starts what. So who is the giver and the receiver. We were working a lot. It's a project really at the beginning, and it's kind of complex and difficult to analyze so many different evidence. But for instance, we were noting some striking similarities in the construction of the so-called magical handbook. How you define a text within those handbooks. So maybe in Greco-Roman Egypt, those ritual specialists, those scribes, were consulting between different traditions. We have a few hypotheses we are developing, but we still didn't arrive to fixed conclusions, because indeed we need more evidence to support both. And I know, of course, I'm aware of the whole anthropological literature of magic, and from Fraser, I use it a lot. It's very useful indeed for broad comparisons. And we have sympathetic magic and both contagious magic are present in our traditions. But then when you have to go more in details with the kind of sources you have, you need subcategories, I think also in anthropology. So that's why in the end I speak of apotropaic magic just for those spells used against snakes or against demons, and curative magic when there is some healing procedure and so on. Although you can group those together, of course, as well into sympathetic and contagious for sure.
In the Joseph story, as it's written in the Hebrew Bible, there's a lot of interpretation of dreams. Joseph interprets dreams for his own family before he goes down to Egypt, and then he interprets dreams for the Pharaoh when he is in Egypt. So it seems as if, as reflected in the Bible, both those cultures did this dream interpretation. And I wonder if you come across a lot of that in Egyptian literature.
Sure, dream interpretation is very big also in Egypt, and today there was no time, so I only mentioned oneric aggressive magic, but there is so much around the dream, the world of dreams, the world of the sleeper, so not only nightmares, but also dreams sent by the god, for instance, in ancient Egypt, in order to tell you something. We have many literary tales with these divinatory dreams. And in the Jewish sources until the medieval times, we have books for sending dreams or interpreting dreams. I think there are some very specific traditions. So in this sense, the evidence coming from the Bible can be seen also in magical sources, especially textual.
Your slides showed an image of a scorpion, which seemed to be repeated on one of the texts that was on one of your slides. What is the significance?
Oh yes, so this was also our icon for the Bonn conference, which I liked a lot, and it's actually it comes from a manuscript of the Cairo Geniza, which is where many magical texts from the medieval Jewish community have been found. Oh, it's this one. I show it also. And so it's indeed as a manuscript. So here there is, I think if I remember well, is a catalog of scorpions, of dangerous scorpions. So you can see here, there is the text and then the kind of scorpion. So we took one of those and made it, the scorpion is in both cultures, and is a symbol of dangers. And in Egypt it's very powerful symbol because it has to do also with the idea of the danger coming from the desert, which means chaos, no creation. Foreigners come from the desert, so the poisonous animal and the image of the foreigner, they almost go together. You find it a lot in those apotropaic objects. Oh, there's another one.
It's not a question, it's just so wonderful to see how people are people. And that the same fears and the same demons and the same desires to somehow combat forces over which they have no control, that they find if somebody's doing something, then why not for them? So
Exactly.
it's sort of like music too, you know, how, well, that sounds good, I'm going to put that.
Despite the different religious traditions, and here we are dealing with a monotheism and polytheism system, so that's why it's so interesting to work on this kind of topic. Thank you.
For now, and I hope everybody appreciated the nice ironic turn of going back to Egypt during the week of Passover. So thank you for doing that with us.